everybody. It's Office Hours. That's right, it's Office Hours. It's number 75, episode number 75 of Office Hours, which is, of course, the call-in show. You know, I've thought about this before, and every time we do a live one of these, if you've ever seen, we've done two now in the grand history of Office Hours. We've done two live ones from conventions. We did two PAXs, and we did some live versions. And every time I do one, I think, I wonder if there's a way that I could make this more live than it is. But then I realized there's a reason that I chose not to do that in the first place. I chose not to, because even a little bit of prep is better than randomly having people call in. Because you know what? Most of the questions, 93% of the questions that you send me are like really good and interesting and thoughtful, and I don't have to do much with them. I don't have to edit them or play with them too much. But like every once in a while I'll get a question that's just like, what do you do? What's happening here? What's going on with you in your life that made you ask me this? So it's it's nice to have a little bit of leeway on that. That being said, I do submit Office Hours as a panel every time I have the opportunity. So there will be more. There will be more future ones that are live. For today, however, we will be operating under the usual protocols. I'm going to answer 3 questions from you. Today, the questions are coming to us from Michael, Siegemeister, and Bash Fu, and we're going to be answering some questions about tabletop role-playing games. These are all GMing questions today, which is cool. No real game design questions today. And we're just going to hang out, and we're going to talk a little bit about the things that are bothering you. Yes, you, Game Master, over in the chair, listening to me talk. So if you have your own questions, if you're like 75 episodes in and still, my worrisome question has not been answered, how can I make Adam answer my question? Well, the best way to do that is by submitting it. So go to www.adam-koble.com. You can go to /office-hours. You can just click on the Office Hours link. There's a form there, and you can fill it out. And if you want, you can record your voice. I like when you do that. That's fun for me. But if you don't want to, that's okay too. I can just read your question. Though, honestly, we don't get a ton of those. Most people either record it or have someone else do it. We haven't had a robot voice in a while. So if you're out there, if you're a robot and you're like, beep, boop, how do I make my players learn how to better interact with each other? Go ahead and submit your question. I want to hear your voice, Robo GM. Let's get to it. Let's answer a question. Well, I got 3 of them. We might as well start, right? Yeah, let's do it. Welcome, one and all, to Office Hours. Hello, hello. Our first question comes from Michael.
Hello, Adam. Over the years, I've DM'd for a lot of people that are looking to live out a certain kind of wish fulfillment fantasy. They themselves aren't the strongest or the fastest, but they will make characters that are, and really enjoy playing out the lives of someone who is powerful in ways they wish that they could be. But there's one sort of player that I've had trouble helping achieve their goals in this regard, and that is the player who has social power fantasies. They will make a character with all of the right stats and abilities. They will pick that Skinner playbook and get the +3 hot, or they'll pick the 18 charisma and all the right feats, but they are still unable to effectively use those moves. They hesitate when it comes time to activate them, or when they do, it's clumsy and tainted in a way that doesn't leave them feeling rewarded. I personally think it's because we're all sitting around doing a social thing and activating those social powers while you yourself are using your own social abilities in front of everyone taints the experience in a way that saying I chop the ogre's arm off does not. I would love to hear your thoughts on how I can help some of these players really get what they're hoping to get out of these extremely social characters that they are making. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear you rant about social abilities in RPGs in general and where they succeed and fail. Thank you.
So, I hate this stuff. I hate it in role-playing games because this comes up inevitably. Like, this is a thing that will come up no matter what, every person who plays role-playing games, if you GM or you play, over a long enough timeline, you will either be the person, you will be in a group with the person, or you will GM for the person who makes a character who is like, my character is smarter than me, my character is wiser than me, and my character is more charismatic than me. How do we handle this? And everybody will get all bent out of shape trying to figure out how to do it. And we'll get all confused and tangled up because we think that for some fucking reason, it makes sense to let our character's stats determine whether we can lift something or throw something, but then all of a sudden it doesn't make any sense at all to just let the dice determine whether we succeed at role-playing something, as whether we succeed at social interaction. Why? Why are we like this? Why is this something that happens? I do understand. I understand why. And Michael, who asked this question, also understands. The core fundamental problem here, the thing that keeps coming up, is that when you play Dungeons and Dragons, it's not also a game about lifting things and throwing things and how many times you can get stabbed before you pass out. It's a game about talking, right? So player skill and character skill get this awful like mix where it devalues the character skill. Now, this never used to be a problem, right? This never used to be a problem. There were, in basic Dungeons and Dragons, there were so few places where the character's charisma mattered, and they were so disconnected from your moment-to-moment roleplay that it didn't really matter, right? Like your charisma, and if this is just purely off the top of my head, people who are more focused on the OSR, who remember the rules of basic D&D better, you can correct me in the comments or in chat. But for me, my memory is that charisma in basic Dungeons and Dragons only affects how many henchmen you can have, right? Total number of henchmen. How do your henchmen respond when you try to tell them to do things, right? Both kind of functions of your henchmen's morale. And then your basic starting point for what a monster thinks of you when you interact for the first time, right? Like when you roll on the initial reactions table, you add or subtract your charisma, right? And that's it. Everything else in the game is you say what your character is saying, and the GM listens to you, and through the lens of the character they're playing, decides whether or not that character agrees. But it gets all confused the further we get away from player skill and the further we get into the character having that skill. So for some reason, saying my character lifts the horse over his head, shrieking, and then throws the horse into the crowd, right? That's fine. You are allowed. Then you roll the dice. You see how hard you throw the horse. Problem solved. Horse pitching complete. But we have this weird thing where we recoil when someone says, paying attention to his facial features and his body language, I pause a moment to think of the exact right thing to say to him. What is it? Okay, I say that. Right? We freak out, and I think the thing is here that Michael nailed to talk about it is that all role playing is a form of us using our own charisma and intelligence as players. And so we get into these sticky situations where we have a hard time separating those two, and it can feel really disingenuous or feel really uncomfortable when all of a sudden we will stop mid-sentence and describe our characters saying something we are not actually saying, right? I joke about this from a GM perspective as being the John Harper method, right? This like, I don't know, just imagine I'm describing the coolest thing that your character can think of. That's what you see, right? And it's a joke. John doesn't actually do that, but you know, I tease because there's this thing where you're like, whatever the right thing is in this situation, that is what my character is smart, wise, or charismatic enough to do. The problem is, when it comes down to it, is that Dungeons and Dragons, being the most popular role-playing game, has very little, if any, mechanical incentive or ability to like back the players up when their characters are better at this shit than they are, right? I can't find looking through the Dungeon Master's Guide, a subsection on how much information to give to your players when they have really high wisdom, right? Like fictional positioning. If I have 20 wisdom, like Ramus Krill, I should theoretically be getting different descriptions of the NPCs from the GM than Berg does with 6 wisdom, right? For Berg should just be like, okay, he is talking, words are coming out of his mouth, he's making facial expressions, he seems maybe like he's angry, but he might also be gassy. You can't really tell. Well, you're gassy, Berg. That's confusing. Maybe he's angry. Maybe he's happy. You're not really sure. And he says he wants you to do something. But with Ramus, I should be saying this NPC, as he speaks, you notice a tiny twitch at the corner of his eye. You've seen this twitch before in people. He's lying to you. He looks slightly to the left when he says the name of his brother. You're starting to think that maybe him and his brother don't have the relationship that he's claiming that they do. He speaks, and there's a tiny waver in his voice at the end of his sentence. He pauses a moment before continuing and swallows. His throat is dry. Right? Like, there's nothing in the game that gives us the tools as game masters to fictionally position characters who are smarter, wiser, or more charismatic. There just isn't. Our only ability that we are given, the only thing the game gives us, insight checks, perception checks, fucking persuasion checks, like these things are conflict or task resolution tools. They're not any assistance in how we build our characters or how we understand the narrative, right? If I have 20 charisma, I should not have to act like I have 20 charisma because I fucking don't, right? I just don't. I don't have a godlike post-human level of manipulation ability over other people. I'm not extremely like superhumanly attractive. Like these are things that are beyond the human pale, let alone assuming that pretty much every person you will ever meet in your whole life maxes out at like a 12 or a 13 for their best stat if they were characters. So this thing about like, how do we role play hyper intelligence? How do we role play hyper insight? How do we role play just characters who are better or smarter than we are at things? And I think we have to play the game as the game is delivered, right? So I guess in the case of, say, 5th edition D&D, it's really easy. The game is designed for people to resolve their super strength or super dexterity. It's already built in. You don't have to do anything to help those players have that power fantasy. But if you want players to have the I am a hyper charismatic person power fantasy, in Dungeons and Dragons, you have to call for those roles way more often, right? You have to call for those roles way more often, and you have to let the players describe their characters from a slightly removed perspective, right? So I think if you're trying to enforce that this is a world in which the characters are better at things than the players, let them describe in that sort of John Harper-esque style that like, my character uses a voice that I know would soothe him, or my character slowly injects barbs into my sentence to try to like pick at them. My character says something like just the right thing in this moment. What is it, right? And answer the players. Like let them have that privileged information. If a character is being squirrely, don't necessarily force the insight check right away. Like give more information to characters who have that social skill. Like cheat for them, right? Give them things for free that other players would have to work for. And do this with all the stats. Like if somebody's got 18 strength, you probably don't have to get them to roll for as many things. But again, this starts to break down, right? This idea of say yes or roll the dice is not actually in Dungeons and Dragons. The real answer here for Michael, now I don't know that Michael's playing D&D, but the real answer is Dungeons and Dragons doesn't give a shit about the players who want to feel like social powerhouses. Like, D&D doesn't care. And you and your players, by caring so much about it, you're going off script, right? You're taking the box of hammers and you're trying to bake a cake. So there are other games that are about that thing, right? There are other games that do that better than Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or those kinds of games, right? If you want to see a game that is essentially a struggle for social control, look at our Burning Wheel campaign, right? None of the characters are particularly good at fighting in that last campaign. Joy had a knife, but it was about manipulating other characters. It was about getting people to do what you want. It's about manipulating them, right? That game gives authority and power mechanically to people who do Duel of Wits or who succeed at a skill check. All the skills in that game are equally the same in terms of what you can get accomplished, how to get your goals, right? Look at a game that does fictional interrogation really well, right? Look at Read a Person. Look at Read a Situation. Look at those and look at the degree. These are from Apocalypse World. Look at the degree to which they just give free information to the player that the character would be able to get because they are really good at their thing, right? It's this idea that as the game master, we basically frame the way the universe is, and we cannot do that neutrally. And I think that's really important. It really comes down to the idea that when you are framing information, when you are giving players information about the universe in which they occupy that narrative, you have to give more information to players who would be able to perceive better things. D&D is going to want you to make insight checks and perception checks, and you can do that. If you call on those checks all the time, then by default, the people with bonuses in those skills, people with bonuses in those abilities will be better at it, and they will get more information, and they will be better equipped to deal with the situations that come up. Or you can just not call for those abilities until there are moments of pivot, right? Moments of like failure or success would both mean something significant, so let's find out what the role is. If you do that, you have to fictionally fill in for the players that get more stuff. But again, you're cheating, right? You're bending the rules of the game. I think that what you can do with these players, if you don't want to change your game too much, is sit down and tell them what they are allowed to do, right? Encourage them to ask questions. Tell them the kinds of questions you want them to ask, right? Say, I will just tell you things in the same way that a character with eyes gets information about photons bouncing off of stuff, right? So I'm a character. I have eyeballs. I can perceive visually. So if the GM is describing things to me, they might describe the color of something. They might describe how far away it is. They might describe something like depth. They might give me an idea of light and dark, right? That is a sense that I have. Now, if we've established that my character doesn't have very good vision, or I've just suffered from head trauma, then the GM might say, you can't really see very well. Things are kind of blurry. You think that the person approaching you, you think they're carrying a weapon, but it might only be like a staff or something. You're not totally sure. You're going to give them different information. A canon example of this is dark vision, right? Vision that gives you a limited method of perception in the world. So take that and look at a character's wisdom or intelligence and treat it as though it were a sense. The higher the stat, the more information you should be giving them when you describe things. Now, chat was asking, how does this interact with puzzles? It doesn't, right? It doesn't interact with puzzles. Hi, hello, I'm over here. So with puzzles, you just don't get that interaction because they're not there for that purpose. Puzzles are there to trick and confound the players, not the characters. So ultimately, you're cheating when you let your players bypass the puzzles because they have high intelligence. And this is where the biggest dissonance kicks in, I think, and why I hate puzzles in a modern iteration of D&D where we're supposed to be immersed in the character. How am I supposed to be immersed in my character when I am a 5th level 20 intelligence wizard? and I can't figure out this dumbass puzzle because I am personally a intelligence 10 human being. So I just don't. I think that this is a divide that has gotten worse and worse over time. Puzzles are a mini game for the players, and it's super frustrating when there's no strength mini game. There's no dexterity mini game, right? There's no. We don't do this for physical stuff. You would never in a million years accept if your DM was like, okay, you can enter the dungeon, but first you need to be able to lift my car off of 2 wheels. Because that's how heavy the door is. So go outside, just go into the driveway, and as a group of you, just pick my fucking car up. And if you can get it off 2 wheels, then I'll let you go into the dungeon. Like, it's stupid. It's not why we play games. There's a reason it's not designed that way. So why are puzzles okay? Because when D&D was originally designed, character intelligence was not a thing. It was a player skill game. Part of playing Dungeons and Dragons was having a sharp brain as a player to work through puzzles. They were puzzles for you, the player, not for your character. We just still keep doing those things, but the characters don't get bonuses. So it's a diversion, and I feel you. I feel your pain. I think this is really stupid, and I hate when it comes up in games. And so I think we need to just generally be more allowing of letting players who are really smart or really wise or really charismatic. I think they should get advantages in social situations, right? And let the rewards of those situations be the same or commensurate with the rewards of combat, right? Like if you're giving out experience for fighting, you should also give experience for solving social situations. However, to go right back to the mechanics, Dungeons and Dragons does not care enough about that to give you granular rules. A fight is going to take 2 hours. You're supposed to resolve social conflict in 1 roll. So, play a different game. If the game that you are playing is not fun because the people who are making characters are not getting rewarded by the game for making those characters and having a good time, you and the game are having a fight. Play a different game. Play a game that will reward those kinds of players better. Or understand, Michael, that you and your group now need to suffer through the game not giving you any assistance. And you're going to have to hack the game. The players are going to have to understand that if you play someone who is built primarily around social stuff, you are not playing optimally. I mean, hell, even a bard most of the time uses their charisma violently, right? As part of combat. So I don't know. I mean, for me, I just try to GM around this stuff. I try to reward players for playing smart characters by giving them more information, giving them more stuff than the other players would get. Fictional positioning. But I also would encourage a player not to be a purely social character. That's you kind of can't in D&D. And if that's your power fantasy and not fighting or social violence, you're going to want to play a game that will do that. So, yeah, try something else. Try Apocalypse World, try Blades, try Burning Wheel. All of those games will do you a better one for playing a social character. Yeah. It's a conundrum. And it's been that way for a long time. And I think that it sucks. It sucks when people try to do that in a game that won't support them. But people need to learn that there are other games to play. D&D does not do everything. And social power fantasy, D&D does not do that. Not well, anyway.
Hey, Adam. At least a few times a session, I have players that ask me, how does this work again? Or what do I add to my attack skill? I've tried gently encouraging my players to check their sheets or the player's handbook, even, which they all have. I've tried imposing a shot clock and question ration during combat. I've even gone as far as buying every spell and ability card from Gale Force 9 and making little spell books for each player. Beyond all that, inevitably someone asks, "What about this?" Then, once I finish putting their battered corpse together in my head, I politely remind them how to find that information, or if I know the rule, just tell them outright. Is there any way I can coach my players into breaking this behavior so that they just have their stuff ready when they intend to do something? Or any other thoughts you have on this would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
You can feel it. You can feel Siegemeister getting angry, right? You can feel the little bit of like, ooh, my players. You can hear it in that first line, the like, I'm doing an impression of my player's voice. That, how does this work again? I'm a dumb player. I don't know anything. You can hear it. You can hear the sizzle in that bit. So I'm of a divided mind here. Yeah. Also, what gave it away? The battered corpse. Yeah. So I'm of a divided mind. I'm of two minds here, because I think on the one hand, like, learn the fucking rules. Learn the rules. That they're there for a reason. Learn them, you asshat. But also, games are complicated and we can forget stuff. And if you don't have a bunch of time to like learn the rules of a game, you may forget things. And so what I think the best approach is to set at the beginning, set your expectations, right? Say to the players, and this is all I care about. This is what I do. I will learn the rules for dungeon mastering this game. I will learn the GM's rules, right? I'll learn the base systems for resolution. I'll learn the core mechanisms of the game. I will learn all of the systems that I need to do a good job for me. What I would like you to do as a player is learn to the best of your ability the same core mechanics of the game, right? How does this game resolve conflict? How does this game work at its base level? What's the core shit? And then learn your character rules, right? If you are a wizard, learn how concentration works. Learn how many spells you have to memorize. Pick some spells and figure out how those work, right? Learn about advancement. Know how many experience points you need to get to the next level. Learn your player rules. That's it. And if everybody does that, they will be able to play their character. However, things will always come up. There will always be stuff that comes up that's like, well, this isn't really a class ability. This isn't really like a GM thing. This is a rule that maybe nobody knows. So let's all pause a minute and look it up, right? Take the time when it's not your turn or when you are not currently engaged in a scene and look forward. Figure out what you're going to do and make sure you know the rule for it, right? Make an effort. And once you've learned something, try to make that the only time that you have to learn it, right? Write it down, make a note. Just keep track of all the stuff that you learn, right? The thing is, there will always be players on both sides of this memory and skill divide, right? There will always be players who know more and who are better at the rules than others. There will always be players who cannot seem to remember for the life of them how their abilities work. So we have to keep in mind that everybody learns differently. Everybody's memory is different, and we have to all work together. So if you are in the middle of performing your job as the game master, you should not always also be the person that answers these questions. We're all responsible for the rules together. So if I am having a conversation with player A, player B should not step in and say, Adam, how does sneak attack work again? Player B should say to player C, hey, player C, do you remember how sneak attack works? I get to continue doing my job. Player A gets to continue doing their job. B and C have worked together to solve the fucking problem. Now, for me, I don't learn player rules. I know so little about how to be a player in so many games because I GM them so much that I like to turn that responsibility over to someone in the group who has a lot of experience or comfort with those rules, right? You've seen this happen in my games online. You know these players, right? Dan and Dave, particular skill at the rules is really useful to me. What I don't think we should do is be mean about this. Not seriously, anyway. Like, I tease Max about forgetting the rules, but, like, playing a druid at level 10, when you've never played really anything but a barbarian before, is a lot of work, and you don't know how spells work, and you're very busy. And honestly, D&D is not the top of your mind all the goddamn time. You think about D&D maybe a little bit before the session, during the session, and maybe a little bit after the session, and you are not picking up that player's handbook again until it's time for D&D. It would be incredibly shitty of me to do something like say, all right, you have 5 seconds to decide what you want to do. 4, 3, 2, sorry, you don't get a turn. Moving on. Don't do that. Fuck that. Fuck that kind of GMing. It is the worst. People don't intentionally play in bad faith, right? Nobody is on purpose trying not to know the rules. And if they are, they're not just bad players, they're shitty people. And you shouldn't be playing with them anyway. We have to accept the fact that some people just don't care as much about learning the rules. And that can be punishing for the whole group when they get to the table. So we need to find ways to support those players and make it easier for them to enjoy the game and make it easier for us to enjoy the game with them, right? And it sounds like Siegemeister has tried a bunch of that stuff, but I wonder, Siegemeister, did you ask your players why they're having trouble remembering this stuff, right? I'm not saying this is your responsibility, Siegemeister. I'm just saying, hypothetically, Socratically, did you ask, right? Did you sit down with your players and say like, so we're having some trouble with the rules. And I know that the game is getting more complicated as we move on in the campaign, but like, we all need to get better at remembering the rules. I've noticed you guys are having some trouble. What would help you? Like, how can I encourage you to do this? Like, do you just not realize that it's a hassle for me? Like, do you just think this is fine? Have I not explained to you that it's bothering me? Have I not expressed my needs yet? If so, here we are. It's bothering me that you don't know the rules as well as I would like. It's slowing the game down, right? Have you tried and you failed? Like, you just don't understand it and it's getting frustrated? Because honestly, I don't think that there is any person on earth who has not been in the situation where they try to learn something and they can't get it and they keep not being able to get it and other people are pressuring them to know what it is and they're like, fuck this and fuck you. I'm just not going to learn. I just can't. I can't figure this out. I'll never remember. Right? Maybe they're in that position. Maybe they feel like they just can't learn it. And it's easier just to ask you because clearly you fucking learned it. So you tell me how it works because I cannot get my head around this, right? Do you need to sit down and like work together to share that knowledge? Why? Like, why are they having this trouble? What is the problem? Because the only real, I don't think it's fair to assume this, but the only real actual problem, the only real actual problem that you could be having is that your players do not care about learning the rules and they just want you to do all the work because they're lazy shitheads. If that's the case, they're going to continue to be lazy shitheads because that's who they are as people, not just players. So fuck them. Find a different group. But most of the time, it's because of something else. And again, I'm gonna pick on Max here because I think that he has been in a position where publicly he has not known a rule multiple times over the course of a campaign, and people have been like varying degrees of shitty to him about it, myself included. But I have made an effort to support Max when I can, and players like him. He's not the only one. But by saying, hey, so obviously you're like having a hard time with this particular thing, or you're having a hard time with your spells. Do you want to sit down after the session and talk about it? Do you need a minute with me and we'll work it out? Or like on the break, I have to set up the next map, but Dan, can you and Max go over his spells, right? Can he help you work that out? So the thing is that I think we need to encourage an environment of learning, right? An environment of sharing and talking and learning. Because you have a problem here, Siegemeister. What we're really talking about, Siegemeister's question could really be, my players are exhibiting a behavior that drives me bonkers. I hate it and it's making me angry. What do I do? How do I fix them so I don't feel this anymore? Right? Let me share I'll share a Dungeon World anecdote with you. So back before Dungeon World existed, way back when, I was playing a game of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which if you've played AD&D, you know, is a garbled fuckfest. It's a total mess. It's so badly written. There are rules all over the place. And it's just not, I mean, it's ancient and garbage as far as the rules go. But there's some neat stuff in it, and it's what my friends wanted to play. They wanted the books with the corny art. They wanted an experience. They wanted to play against the Cult of the Reptile God, right? They wanted that 70s Dungeons and Dragons vibe. They had never played D&D before. So as you can imagine, all they really wanted to do was talk in silly voices and tell me what their characters were doing. And then it was my job to know all of the rules, to be like, oh, okay, you're doing this thing. That sounds like you're trying to make this attack or move and do this thing. And like, I had to basically tell them all the rules. I was the whole rules encyclopedia. And I fucking hated it. It was exhausting. It was boring. And I had to learn the entire game myself again. And I wasn't interested. It just wasn't fun or cool for me. So what I did was I just designed a new game. Because the game that we were playing wasn't the right one. And there wasn't a game like that. So I just made a new game that did what we were already doing. The players would describe what their characters were doing. The rules would interject, tell them how it went, and we all just fucking carried on, right? All of the rules that they wanted were on their character sheet. They had 2 pages to learn. That's it. And we were done. And so, I mean, obviously you don't have to design a whole game to solve this problem, but the problem wasn't that the players didn't want to learn like the rules. That's a valid way of playing. Like if you just want simple, normal, like limited interaction, you're not interested in knowing every single rule in the game, play a different game, right? And if that game doesn't exist, you might have to write it. But I think that this is a social problem. I think that this is a social problem in the sense that it doesn't sound to me like Siegemeister, it doesn't sound like you've come forward to your group and said, hey friends, you're killing me. You're killing me over here. This is why I feel frustrated. I don't want to imagine chopping you up into tiny little pieces out of this deep-seated rage that I'm feeling. I would like us all to collaborate together in playing this game. And to do that, I need you to learn the fucking rules. Is there something that is causing you not to be able to learn the rules? What is that thing? How can we all help and support each other in learning the rules? Because honestly, I don't think that there is an out here where you continue along this current path. I think your players need to learn the rules because it's making you unhappy that they don't know how. It's just about all of you as people, not as a game master and players, but all of you as people engaging in a game together. How are you going to survive this? How are you going to learn the rules? For me, my coping mechanism for Court of Swords has been, if I don't know the rule off the top of my head, ask Dan. Dan will probably know it. If Dan doesn't know it, then we look it up, or I make a ruling, right? We have protocols in place now. So figure out what your protocols are. If someone doesn't know a rule, what do you expect them to do? How much should they know? Tell them this. Because they probably don't know. You didn't sit down and talk about it in the first place, right? You didn't say, hey, everybody, read pages 12, 14, 16, and 18, make notes, then read page 22, right? I don't think you did that. I think you just said, let's play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. So sit them down, talk to them about what your expectations for them are, ask them what you can do and what the other players can do to help them do that, and then do the thing. And have in place, like, what do we do if we don't know? What do we do if I don't know, or you don't know, or no one knows? How do we handle that? Right? And that's it. That's how it goes. Everybody learns different. Everybody's brain works differently. Some people, like your Dans and your Daves, learn the rules of Dungeons and Dragons real easy. Other people, less so. For some people, certain types of games are easier than others, right? So, talk to your players. Sit down with them. Be like, yo, we got to figure this out because I'm going crazy. And I want to murder you in game, not out of game. So we need to solve this problem. Good luck. Good luck, Siegemeister. I believe in you.
Hi Adam, I've been GMing D&D 5th edition now for about 2 years, and in that time I've had a few different groups, but the one thing that's always been constant is that I've used random number generators and online tools to create the content for my games, allowing them to be played like a sandbox, where characters can sort of pick a spot on the map, go there, and I'll just create content on the fly for them to experience. What I'd like to do is move into a more traditional style of game while keeping that sort of sandboxy feel, with the characters still choosing where they want to go and what they want to do, but having enough options available that are handcrafted that the experience itself doesn't suffer. So I guess what my question is how do you organize that sort of information? How do you keep track of your quests and your different story threads and your characters and various things like that, and be able to pull them up at a moment's notice? Specifically, I know that you run quite a few games through Roll20. Is there any particular tool set that they offer that could help me instead of a big 3-inch binder?
Yeah, so this is a cool question because it's multi-layered, right? It's about structural tools that we can use to organize our GM notes and what that looks like, but also like this idea between the differences between a sandbox style game and a sort of pre-generated content style game, right? Procedurally content created D&D versus predetermined content presented as if it were a sandbox. So let's talk about that first. So Bashfu is talking about, in the first mode, this idea of, here is the world. You can only see what is in front of you, right? You have the hex you're in, and you know the 6 hexes around you. That is it. And when you move into another hex, I, as the content generating engine of this campaign, will generate stuff for that hex. I do not know in advance when you go into that hex what is there. Right? If you say we are going north twice and then northwest once, and we're gonna look for adventure in that hex, I do not know what is there. I cannot prepare. So I might roll on a random table to say, okay, you are entering the edge of a desert, and you see in the distance there is a forgotten temple. Okay, and as you approach the forgotten temple, you see that it is occupied by snail men. Okay, great. Cool. Welcome to the Forgotten Temple of the Snail Men. This is the adventure. I am going to take a short break. You guys grab a snack, and I will generate the first level or the first 2 levels of the Dungeon of the Snail Men. So the idea here is that essentially the Fog of War is a Schrodinger's box of adventures that is obscured from both players and GM until it is uncovered. The GM rolls on some tables and will create random stuff. This is what is generally referred to as a sandbox, but I want to say I don't like Bashfu's distinction between traditional game and sandbox, because The implication here is that the style of sandbox Bashu is talking about is, as you move through the sandbox, you are building the sandcastles in front of the PCs. As they approach the important thing, you build it, you set it, it's there now forever. But I think that the other mode in which you, as the GM, come to the sandbox several weeks before the players arrive and you build everything in the sandbox, then you hide most of it under a fog, that's still a sandbox style game, right? It's absolutely still a sandbox style game, because sandbox style games are about player exploration. The only difference is whether you know beforehand what the players are going to explore. Now, the advantage of knowing everything in advance, the advantage of building the whole sandbox, is the same as the advantage of buying a box set or picking up a campaign setting book with a map and having it fully filled in, right? It's like Tomb of Annihilation. In Tomb, I was able to guess with a reasonable degree of success where the players might end up within a session of time. I could look at all the hexes surrounding the hex they were in, and I could prepare, right? I could say, okay, they might end up in the garden where the Medusa lives. I will make sure I read that section and I am prepared and I understand what's going on, right? I'm ready. It reduces the amount of anxiety you might feel when you're being forced to improvise. Because in a random sandbox situation, you definitely have to improvise every single hex, right? Every single hexagon as they move into it, or square, or room, or however you're structuring your mapping tools. So, I think the advantage of the randomly generated fog for everyone mode is that you don't have to do any prep. You don't have to read anything, and you certainly don't have to build the whole universe from scratch just so your players can bake an apple pie, right? All you need to know is one of these hexes might, on a random table, have an apple tree in it. Let's go exploring. And you as a player, and this is the advantage of the random model, you as a player, as a participant in the game, you get to be surprised and excited too, right? And I use this as my common example. I love random tables in games because I feel like they force my brain to work faster. They stretch my imagination. This is you're on the 3rd level of the Caves of Chaos, and you've just fought your way through a room full of gnolls, and in this hallway is a wandering troop of halfling merchants. Okay, fuck, I have to make this work. Why? Why are they here? What are they doing here? Okay, there's a gnoll in this, okay, and then, so they're probably captives, or no, they just escaped, or no, they brought wine to the gnoll. They're wine merchants, and these gnolls love wine, and so they're guests of the gnolls. Okay, perfect. So it's this ad hoc experience of generating stuff right before the players open the door, right? Unveiling the cat and learning if it's alive or dead. They both have their own merits. They both have reasons for being used, and I think they're both great styles of game. I wouldn't draw that line between traditional style and sandbox style. I'd say the two things we're kind of looking at here are sandbox games in which the plot is largely derived from imaginary patterns in the world, right? So we can imagine in a randomly generated sandbox game, if you run into the same type of monster over and over, you've created a plot element. This monster probably lives in this area, right? If you've experienced an orc ambush in 3 of the 5 hexes that you've been in today, you're probably in orc country. The GM can derive that information from the randomness. However, in a pre-built adventure, or in an adventure where you as the GM have sat down and populated every hex, you know when they enter orc territory, right? The effect is the same. And in fact, really, if these two styles of game are done, I don't want to say properly or like well, but if these two styles are done seamlessly, you as a player would never be able to tell the difference, right? So for me, I tend to prefer a little of both. And this is what I loved about Tomb of Annihilation. It had a pre-generated map with pre-generated adventure stuff happening in the hexes on those maps. But the weather and the encounters were random. And that forced me to stretch my brain. So it's not all one or the other. I think the advantage of pre-gen stuff, too, is you can work in tools like fronts or countdown clocks. You can work in stuff like the faction turn, right? The faction turn requires a predicated universe. There are advantages, I think, to that style. If you've watched any of the games that I've run that are not like pre-gen adventures, I usually don't even have a map. It's just like whatever the bubble around the characters and then every other thing they've touched. But my mapping is narrative. My mapping is relationships. It's event-based, right? I think much more clearly about what happened when than I do what happened where. So I don't really do this style of adventure very often. But that doesn't mean that the tools that I use aren't useful to you. So when I'm making notes, when I'm doing stuff for a role-playing game, regardless, like organizing my tools, there are a few things. I would say the three main tools of me as a GM, the three main things that I use to organize my notes and to like kind of stay sorted are a paper notebook, right? My GM notebook. Now, this is usually like a Muji gel pen and whatever notebook I have at hand. I'm looking around. I have like 3 of them. Whatever notebook I have at hand at any given time. These are for scribbling down notes when they come. They are for taking notes during sessions. It's transitory, temporary notes, right? So I have that. That's my like quick and dirty. Now I've actually moved for a lot of those notes to my iPad. I do a lot of writing on my iPad now. But it's the same functional, it fills the same goal. It's the short-term memory of my GM prep, right? Then my next tool is Google Drive, right? Google Docs, draw.io for relationship maps. If you've seen any of my GM streams, you know that usually it's just a Google Doc or multiple Google Docs for different stuff, and then a couple of relationship maps in draw.io. Very rarely, to illustrate something, I'll make a terrible Microsoft Paint drawing, but mostly I just use text, and I will organize these things top level by show, next level by arc, because I'm not designing even a sandbox RPG. I'm designing by season. So for me, it'll be show, arc, or show, season, arc, right? Because sometimes we do multiple arcs in a season. But for you, it might be locative, right? It might be world notes, country notes, location notes. Now, aside from all of that, I like fronts. I like countdown clocks. I like pressure. I like narrative pressure in the universe. So I will have a document that says, regardless of where the players are, regardless of where they go, or who they're fighting, or what dungeon they're in, or whatever, regardless of all that stuff, this is the ticking clock. So I will have, for my arcs or for my seasons, I'll have fronts that I'm ticking through. So when I'm GMing, I can have multiple tabs open, and I've got, you know, the overarching season. I've got today's episode, little notes about what the NPCs want, who's present, where are the characters. And then I have my fronts document to say, overall in the campaign, here's where shit is sort of like stacking up. And they're just plain like text documents. You could get fancy, I guess. Like, I've never been one to go too far into, you know, this sort of thing, but you could use a wiki. Scrivener as a tool has some, it's a writing tool, but it's also good for like creating like notes and kind of doing some hyperlinking between those notes, which you could do if you want to. I'm not honestly like a big prep GM, though I've been doing so much of it lately. My prep tends to be the Kevin Crawford model of prep, right? The idea that you only prep what you think you need in the next game. Excuse me. What you think you need in the next game. If you are having fun, keep going, but I almost never am. I mean, that isn't to say I'm not having fun doing GM prep, but like 2 hours of GM prep will get me 4 to 6 hours of game. So, you know, the thing is, you're going to learn what you like prepping, but you always need whatever's right in front of the players. Now, in a sandbox game, you have to know how fast your players can travel. Because if they're walking and the hexes are big, you only need to know what's in walking distance, right? if you give your players griffins to fly around on, you have just dramatically expanded the stuff you need to be prepped for. But you want to know a secret? You want to know a secret? So sandbox games, this is a big secret. GMs don't want you to know this. So sandbox games, the players can go anywhere, right? You have to know the whole world because they could go, they could teleport anywhere in the universe and you have to be ready, right? And you could never in a million years know where they could go, right? You'll never know. Or you could just fucking ask them. You could just ask. Like, just ask. Just be like, hey, where do you guys want to go this session? What do you want to do? I'm going to be preparing next session. We just finished playing. It sounds like you guys want to go after the Dragon Lord, but like, is that what you want to do? And they'll be like, yeah, I think so. The Dragon Lord's castle's right over there. We're going to rip it out over to the castle and we're going to fight the Dragon Lord. And you're like, cool. I'm going to prep that Dragon Lord. Just fucking ask. This is the thing. Like, people get so scared of sandbox games because they're like, oh God, I have to know everything. You don't have to know anything. Just ask. Like, what do you guys want to do? The biggest change for me, if I was having a hard time with prep, with say Court of Swords. So Court of Swords I've incentivized the players telling me what they want, right? I've said to the players, I will give you experience points if at the beginning of the session you say, I want to do this. Because then you can do that. You can put that in the game, right? If I was having a hard time with prep, I would just do that at the end of the session because that's the question, right? If you do it at the end of the session, you say, same with like Burning Wheel, with Torchbearer, with Mouse Guard, do beliefs, instincts, and goals at the end of the session so that you have the whole rest of the week to plan for the next session, right? Like, just ask them at the end, okay, guys, what are your goals for next session? Cool. You will be rewarded if you do these things. I will prep them. So easy. That way, you don't have to worry about knowing everything. Your players can't throw you a curveball if they tell you, okay, Adam, I'm throwing a curveball, here it comes, and you're ready. It's not a curveball anymore. Sports. But yeah, so that's the idea, is you just ask. Because then the players get to do what they want, and you get to give them an experience that, as you point out, is high-quality content, right? As for Roll20, that's my third tool. So the third tool that I use is Roll20. I don't really play role-playing games in person. I think I played an RPG in person in August. And then again, I think like maybe less than 10 sessions a year in person. Like I just played one in Seattle, but that was an exception rather than the rule. So yeah, for Roll20, it's a great place to keep track of maps, obviously. It's a virtual tabletop for a reason. Maps, automated random tables, right? If you want to keep using some random stuff. There are some very excellent random tables and macros in Roll20. I am constantly blown away by people's ability to generate those things. It can do some magic. I also really love the GM layer. The GM layer is a great place to write in invisible ink things that the players won't know, make notes right on the map, right? So you can remember it later, circle things, draw lines. The GM layer is magic because the players will never see any of that stuff. I love it. I use the GM layer all the time. And then you have all these different tabs and you have your journal. So you can upload notes. You can, like, it has a bunch of tools that aren't, you're not going to get like the same kind of database situation that you would get out of a hyperlinked wiki. Large blocks of text do not belong in Roll20. Graphic objects, short form notes, handouts, and reference material, right? If it's visual, you probably want to keep it in Roll20. If it's text, put it in your Google Docs. I don't know. Chat or YouTube commenters, do you have a favorite tool? What do you use to organize all your GM bullshit, right? I outsource a lot of my notes to chat, whether through the Farverona wiki or just chat remembering things that I can't remember because I'm running the game. But chat, you have the advantage of like listening and paying attention mostly. So I outsource a lot of that stuff. But if you have a favorite tool, yeah, let us know, right? I'm seeing a ton already. How do you do your your prep? What do you do to record all your stuff? Maybe Bashfu will find a new tool that will help build this cool sandbox, this sandbox game. I love it. Organization is phenomenal. I think an organized GM is a well-prepared GM, and a well-prepared GM is a comfortable GM, and a comfortable GM has the opportunity to shine. So find ways to make your job easier, whether they're tools or workflow operations, whatever it is. I will not judge you. If you are a wiki crafting, hand coding, GitHub using super nerd, hats off to you, friend. I'm not, but maybe you are. And that's cool. Because there's like a billion different ways to GM well. And your unique little bits and pieces are going to be very different from everyone else's. I think that's really cool. That makes me happy. Yeah. So go out there. I mean, this is a hot blog topic. GM organizational tools. I can tell you mine. You can see them in action. Watch any of my GM prep videos, but other people, just do a quick Google. You'll find all kinds of stuff in varying degrees of complexity. So thank you, Bashfu. Thank you, Siegemeister. Thank you, Michael, for asking your questions today. If you want to get involved and ask questions of me for future episodes of Office Hours, please do. I love them. I love your questions. So submit them to me. www.adam-koble.com. Click that Office Hours link, fill out the form, record your voice, or don't. I don't care. I just want your questions. And then we'll answer them in a future episode. That's it for today. This has been episode number 75 of Office Hours. As we hone in on episode number 100, I find myself so thankful that I'm able to do this content for you. Thanks for coming, everybody. We will see you next time.